Hey everybody, Sayre at Nova Motorcycles again. It's getting into fall here in New England. And fall is a beautiful time to ride, for sure. It is a time when you start thinking about maybe putting your bike away for the winter. But because of that, it's also a great time to buy a motorcycle. So we thought that we would talk this week about just some of the things to look at when you're picking up a bike. Um, so the reason why it's a good time to buy in the fall is people are done with their bikes and a lot of people are ready to just move on, get rid of it. Some people don't want to ride anymore. Some people, just decided want something else, and now's the time to get rid of it. Um, so that brings into play a lot of things when buying a bike that may not be there because of the fact that people are trying to kind of unload something. So you may get a deal, but you may get a bike that was ridden hard and put away wet, as they say. Um, we'll talk about some specifics, but in general, we'll talk about stuff that applies to vintage stuff and new stuff. There's sort of a spectrum rather than hard lines between this stuff because it's all wear, use, things like that. But in general, some concepts that I really want people to remember and I use is mileage isn't as important as people make it out to be. You can have a low mileage bike that was abused and is not a bike you should buy. You can have a very high mileage bike that has service records, was well maintained, and is just, that's a far better buy than you can. So when buying anything, having service records that the previous owner has, knowing that the maintenance has been done, you can see what larger items may have happened to it over the years. That is as good as gold, basically. So anytime anybody is coming in here trying to sell a bike through us, and if it's a classic, we say, if you have the service records, that's going to be a real helpful, selling point on it. And with classics, we go as far back as to who bought it, when did they buy it from the dealer originally? That stuff, golden. But even just on your general riding machines, knowing what's happened to the bike is far more important than theoretically, a low mileage machine. That goes for cosmetic stuff too. Obviously, you don't want a bike that's been left out in the rain too much. But someone who rides their bike a lot, it may not be as pretty as a bike that doesn't get ridden, but it may be better maintained. You may have somebody who rode their bike but kept up with it. So don't be swayed by shiny things. A lot of shiny things glitter too much. A bike that's been sitting around for a long time may have a bunch of problems with, seals have gone bad. Tires have dry rotted. Bearings have, the grease is dried out and you start to use it and the bearings fail, something like that. All sorts of stuff can happen on a pretty bike that hasn't been used enough. So there's no hard and fast rules on these things. You just got to kind of learn to look at stuff. End of the season stuff, you'll probably find a bike that probably needs tires. Somebody may or may not change their tires before they get ready to sell it. Somebody who does change the tires before they're selling it is somebody who's probably a good sign that they've done other maintenance on it. They're looking ahead on something, not just reacting to problems as they come up. So that's a very good maintenance record of somebody who's actually thinking down the road of what their bike will need. Great person to buy a bike from. In general, when you're looking at an old machine, looking for example here, some of the stuff you see, obviously tires, they're relatively easy to tell if they're okay or not. Actually, this bike might have some dry rot we can see. Yeah, right here. This is an example of dry rot. A tire like that won't pass inspection. That happens due to age, due to sitting, due to exposure to sun. But that will need new tires. So regardless of how good the tread is, it's not going to be great. Same thing with age. You can have tires that actually look okay, but they're 20 years old. Probably not the best to be riding on. We encourage people to change tires when that happens. Things like fork seals, we have leaky fork seals that happen around here. You'll see oil coming down here when that happens. The fork seal itself, easy maintenance item. We do it for a few $100. But the fork tubes, you get rusting on the fork tubes. When that happens, that's a much more expensive repair. You have to replace the whole tube. So looking for stuff, any rusting on the tube in the area where the fork has to move, you might want to stay away from it, or at least let the seller know and negotiate price down on that. It's very common in old machines. Not a lot of people know what to look for. Cosmetically, that's a style thing. I personally don't mind things a little crusty and rough if it's a cool machine. Example, this is my race bike, very crusty, very rough, but mechanically it's all there and it goes like stink. That's my preference. If you want to have something that's pretty and functional, you're going to pay more for it for sure. But Oh yeah, but just be willing to pay for that. But uh, we lost my train of thought there for a second. So we'll go back into other things to look for. This is not going to be a good example because this is an aluminum tank. But what happens when fuel and moisture sit around? Moisture gets in the fuel, sorry, and it sits around. Your gas tanks get rusty. We see it all the time. We have to clean them out. We have to sometimes reline them. Sometimes they rust so bad that they actually rust through the tank, and it's pretty gross. That can be a real pain in the ass. It can also be not a big deal. It's something, again, is on a spectrum of it's not the end of the world, but if it's really bad, you want to think about that. It can clog up the whole fuel line. It can actually ruin a tank. We have one customer who has a tank that's a 1-year-only bike, has had a hell of a time getting it to work properly. It's actually, was rusted so bad that it would not take any sealant, and he had to actually throw the whole thing away after spending hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars on it. It can be an issue. Definitely something you want to check out. If it's nice and clean in there, a good sign the bike was used a lot, didn't have a chance to sit around, and it's a good sign. Chains, if you have rust on your chain, that's a sign the bike hasn't been used very much. If it's too dry, it's a sign, this has oil on it. That's what you want to see, a nice coat of oil all over the whole thing. If it's too dry, it's a sign that someone isn't lubing their chain. If it's rusty and dry, it's a sign that it's not really even getting used up at all. So you want to look for evidence that the bike actually gets used, and again, look for things that the bike actually gets maintained. There are smaller things, are the brake pads okay? What is it, again, going back to tires, what is the condition of the tires? Is a chain, worn out? Does it need sprockets? Those are smaller wear items. It's normal to change those. So if the rest of the bike has been maintained and has service records on it, you can negotiate those into pricing and say, hey, this is great, but I know I'm going to need a chain. I know I'm going to need sprockets. So let's talk. Let's wheel. I can go deep into the weeds on a lot of other things, and it's really hard. It's a case by case basis. And people ask me this question all the time. Hey, is this a good bike to buy? And I say, well, my threshold for what's okay and what's not okay is different for a lot of people. So I always turn it around and I ask the question, what do you want out of this? Are you trying to get into a project? Do you want something that you're going to maybe spend less on up front, but you're going to put money into, or do you want something you get on and go? And 9 times out of 10, if you don't want a project, if you don't want to become a mechanic, it's better to pay a little bit more for a bike that has things like service record, is up to date, is actively being used or mostly being used on a semi-regular basis. Everything is good on it. Pay a little premium for that because you won't have to pay for it down the road.
Bring it in to a mechanic like you?
Yeah. If you wanted to, we do. People bring us by bikes, say, I'm thinking of buying this. I'll have this conversation with them, and I'll go through it, and we can give an opinion about it. We don't give appraisals. We don't give official notices that this is how much is this worth. This is that. But we're happy to talk about it because when you buy a bike, particularly a used machine, you're getting into a relationship. Hopefully not too much with us on the needing repairs side of things, but we're always happy to talk about the bikes. And you are getting into a relationship with your bike, and each one is different. Especially once you get 5-10 years out on a bike being 5 or 10 years old or more, getting into 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, 70 years, like we work on. The bikes become incredibly individualized, and they need very specific different things. So there's no easy answers to all of this, but so you're entering into a relationship and something you want to be engaged with. So yeah, for fun, hit us up in the comments with some of your horror stories about buying bikes. Those are always fun. I've had stories of people buying bikes that have empty engines where they promised it was a whole motor. They buy it, they get it shipped to them, and it's not at all that. So buyer beware. Modern auction sites can be great, but they're also horrible for things like that. Some of our other videos, we've had a couple examples of bikes that had to be completely rebuilt once they come to us for a tune-up. So definitely you got to figure out that the bike is actually as it's being represented. Chime in with your horror stories. Chime in with the positive stories too. Not everything is bad. If you're local and you're trying to buy something, come chat with us. We're happy to talk you through some stuff. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe, and keep watching.